They say dreams are harmless fragments of the subconscious, shadows of thoughts, stitched together by the restless mind. But what happens when a dream doesn't feel borrowed from your imagination? What happens when the dream feels alive, as though something, or someone, is watching you from beyond the veil of sleep? For Eamon, the first night it happened, he wasn't sure if he had fallen asleep or if something had pulled him under. His small bedroom was quiet, the hum of the ceiling fan droning in the background. Outside, the streetlights flickered like old lanterns, leaving the neighborhood in patches of shifting darkness. Yet when his eyes shut, he felt it. The sensation of descending into a place colder, heavier, and far older than any dream he had known before. He stood in an endless corridor. The floor was made of cracked stone, and the walls breathed, expanding and contracting as if alive. A low whisper echoed in the air, though no source could be found. It was not a language he knew, but somehow he understood. You were not supposed to be here. Eamon tried to move, but his steps were muffled, swallowed by the silence between whispers. Then he noticed the others. Figures, tall and twisted, stood along the corridor's edge. They were shaped almost like humans, but not quite. Too thin, too elongated, their faces obscured by shadows that seemed to resist the faint glow that illuminated the hallway. Their eyes, if they had any, reflected nothing. Among them, one stepped forward. It didn't walk so much as glide, as if space folded around it. Eamon's throat dried. He told himself it was just a dream, an illusion crafted by his tired mind. Yet the cold he felt in his chest was too real, the way his breath fogged in the air too convincing. "Why do you enter?" the figure asked, though its mouth never moved. The words carved themselves directly into his thoughts. Eamon wanted to speak, but his lips wouldn't obey. He turned, hoping to wake, to run. But the corridor stretched endlessly in both directions. No doors, no escape. Only the silent witnesses in the shadows and the one figure moving closer. He squeezed his eyes shut, desperate to break the dream. When he opened them, he was back in his room, drenched in sweat. The fan still spun lazily overhead, and the faint glow of the streetlight seeped through the curtain. It was over, or so he thought. But something wasn't right. On his bedside table, where he had left nothing, there now rested a small object. A fragment of stone, cracked and rough, identical to the flooring of the corridor in his dream. And in the silence of his room, faint and unmistakable, the whisper followed him back. You were not supposed to be here. By day, Eamon tried to convince himself the nightmare was just a byproduct of exhaustion. He buried himself in work, answering emails, rushing through deadlines, and pretending nothing had changed. But the truth gnawed at him. The cracked stone fragment still sat on his bedside table. He hadn't thrown it away, not yet. A part of him was afraid that if he did, something worse would happen. Eamon wasn't entirely alone in his life. He often confided in his cousin, Sana, a quiet, bookish woman with a fascination for folklore. She believed dreams carried messages, warnings from unseen worlds. When he hesitantly told her about the corridor and the whispering shadows, her expression shifted from curiosity to concern. "Dream demons," she whispered, her voice trembling though she tried to steady it. "Old texts call them Karan, companions that watch us from the unseen. They slip into dreams when doors are left open." Eamon forced a laugh, but it felt hollow. "It's just a dream, right?" Sana didn't answer immediately. Instead, she reached for the stone fragment, running her fingers across its jagged surface. Dreams don't leave objects behind. From that night on, the disturbances grew worse. Eamon heard faint whispers when he lay in bed, sometimes murmuring his name, sometimes reciting words he didn't understand. Shadows in his room didn't match their sources. They bent strangely, moving against the light of the lamp. Even his reflection in the mirror seemed off, the eyes just a fraction slower to blink than his own. Sana, too, began to feel the weight of the haunting. She confessed she had started dreaming of the corridor as well, though Eamon never told her enough detail for her to imagine it. She described the same breathing walls, the same impossible figures lurking in the shadows. The worst part wasn't the dreams themselves, but the in-between. That fragile moment of waking where neither of them could be certain they were truly back in their world. The hum of the ceiling fan, the glow of the streetlight, the ticking clock, ordinary sounds now felt staged, as though masking something more sinister beneath. And always, always, the whisper, "You were not supposed to be here." Neither of them said it aloud, but both felt the same truth pressing in. This was no longer a question of whether the haunting was real. The question was how much deeper it would go, and whether they'd ever wake up fully again. Ayman's sleepless nights began to bleed into his days. Dark circles carved themselves beneath his eyes, and his nerves frayed with every shadow that flickered across the room. Sana stayed close, but even she couldn't shield him from the creeping dread. One evening, his old friend Hamza dropped by, uninvited but concerned. Hamza was the rational type, an engineer who scoffed at anything supernatural. When Ayman and Sana told him about the whispers and the recurring dreams, he smirked. "Nightmares," Hamza said, shaking his head, "and paranoia feeding on lack of sleep. That's all. You two are spooking yourselves." But as he spoke, the lights flickered overhead. The three froze. Then, slowly, the ceiling fan above them creaked to a halt, though the switch had not been touched. Hamza tried to laugh it off, but his voice cracked in the attempt. The disturbances escalated after that. At night, doors slammed without warning, even when locked. Objects shifted places. A chair dragged across the room, a glass turned upside down on the counter. Once, Ayman awoke to find words scrawled on his wall in what looked like soot. "Stay out." Sana began researching the house itself. It wasn't old, but it carried a history that was unsettling in its own right. A previous tenant had moved out suddenly, leaving most of his belongings behind. Neighbors whispered that he had gone mad, claiming to be tormented by dreams he couldn't escape. The landlord dismissed it as personal issues, but the pattern was impossible to ignore. Ayman and Sana's bond began to fray under the strain. He accused her of feeding into his paranoia with her folklore, while she accused him of hiding details from her, details she felt she needed to protect them. Hamza, still clinging to his skepticism, pulled away, claiming they were dragging him into a shared delusion. Yet the presence refused to be dismissed. The whispers grew louder, sometimes so close they seemed to breathe against Ayman's ear. He began to dread mirrors, swearing that his reflection lingered even after he moved away. Sana confessed she felt watched even during the day, as if the corridor from their dreams had bled into the waking world. Then came the discovery. While searching the attic for clues about the previous tenant, Ayman stumbled upon a small wooden box, locked but faintly humming, as if something inside it pulsed with life. Scratched across the lid in jagged letters were the words, "You opened the door." Sleep had become impossible. Every night the shadows pressed closer, every whisper louder, clearer, almost conversational. Ayman felt his mind splintering under the constant intrusion. Sana, pale and hollow-eyed, confessed she no longer knew if she was awake or dreaming. Even Hamza, once the skeptic, now avoided the house, muttering that the air inside felt wrong, though he refused to say more. The haunting turned violent. Doors slammed with such force the frames splintered. Plates crashed from shelves, shattering into jagged pieces without warning. At night, heavy footsteps echoed in the hallway outside Ayman's bedroom, deliberate and slow, stopping only when the doorknob began to rattle. Once, he awoke to find his blanket dragged halfway across the room, as though invisible hands had tried to pull him away. The voices no longer whispered. They called. Sometimes they used Ayman's name, sometimes Sana's, twisting their syllables into cruel imitations of familiarity. One night, Sana swore she heard her late father's voice beckoning from the darkness, urging her to come home. The realization that the presence could mimic the dead shattered what little calm she had left. The group debated leaving, abandoning the house altogether. But the fear followed them even in thought. "If it's in the dreams," Sana whispered, clutching her notebook of research, "then it doesn't matter where we go. It will come." Ayman, desperate, suggested opening the wooden box from the attic, believing it might hold an answer, or a way out. Sana argued it could make things worse. Their argument ended in silence, both realizing that the choice might not be theirs to make much longer. That night, the house itself seemed alive. The walls groaned as if breathing, the lights pulsed like a failing heartbeat, The three huddled together in the living room, unable to bring themselves to sleep. Then came the sound, something dragging across the floor above them. Slow, heavy, deliberate. Hamza, trembling despite himself, whispered, "There's nothing up there." But when Ayman looked toward the stairwell, his blood froze. A figure was standing at the top of the stairs. It wasn't shadowed anymore, it had form. Too tall, its limbs bent wrong, its head tilted at an unnatural angle. And then it moved. Step by step, it descended, each footfall echoing like thunder in the silence. The final sound before the lights snapped out was a voice, not whispered this time, but clear and cold. "You opened the door. Now we come through." The figure froze halfway down the stairs, its faceless head cocked toward them as though studying prey. Ayman's chest tightened, every instinct screaming to run, yet his legs refused. Then, as the lights flickered weakly back to life, the figure was gone. Only the echo of its voice remained, rattling through his skull. "You opened the door." Shaken and desperate, Ayman demanded they open the attic box. "We need answers," he said, though his voice quivered. Sana protested, clutching the box as though it might burn her. But then Hamza, the skeptic who had mocked them for weeks, stepped forward. His expression had changed. Cold. Unfamiliar. "Don't you see?" Hamza whispered. "This was never the house. It was never the dreams. It was you, Ayman. You're the door." The words struck like a blade. Ayman stammered, denying it, but Sana's face drained of color. "The whispers, they always call you, not me. Not anyone else." Her voice cracked. What if Hamza's right? Ayman's mind spun. The nights of waking with objects out of place, the scratches on the wall, the stone fragment on his bedside table. Had he brought all of it back with him? The realization clawed at his chest. What if the entity had never been haunting the house, but had been anchored to him from the start? He turned to Hamza, searching for reassurance, but the man's eyes gleamed strangely in the dim light. "You should have told her," Hamza hissed. "You should have told her what you saw when you were 12, in the hospital. Do you remember the shadows by your bed? Because they remember you." Ayman staggered back, his breath ragged. Memories long buried clawed their way up, nights of sleep paralysis, figures at the edge of his vision, a presence that had whispered to him for years. He had convinced himself it was childhood fear. But now he wondered if it had never left. Sana clutched her chest, tears brimming. "If it's tied to you, then none of us are safe. We're trapped with it." The box in her lap vibrated violently, rattling against her arms. Something inside scratched, as though begging to be freed. The three of them stared at it, paralyzed, as the sound rose to a shrill screech. And then the lid cracked, just slightly, spilling out a whisper that was not one voice, but many, overlapping, laughing, calling Ayman's name. Escape, they realized, might already be impossible. The attic box split open with a shriek like metal tearing. Darkness poured from within, not shadows, but something thicker, alive, writhing against the air itself. The room warped, the walls stretching like elastic, the ceiling buckling as though the house were bending inward. Ayman clutched his head as the voices multiplied, no longer whispers but a chorus, chanting his name. Sana screamed, dropping the box, and the floor beneath it cracked, a web of fractures racing outward as though the foundation itself rejected what had been unleashed. From the spreading fissure, the corridor appeared, the same stone walls, the same breathing floor, bleeding into their reality. Figures emerged, the dream demons he had seen, tall, twisted, their faceless heads tilting in unison. This time, they did not remain still. They moved closer. Hamza staggered back, shouting at Ayman, "This is you! You brought them here!" His words blurred into rage, but Ayman barely heard him. The truth had surfaced, undeniable. He had been marked since childhood, chosen as a passage. The nightmares weren't visitors. They were familiars, waiting for him to open the way. The air grew suffocating. Every light bulb in the house burst, plunging them into strobing flashes of light and dark. The figures advanced, their limbs bending at unnatural angles, filling every corner. One reached for Sana, and she shrieked as its fingers grazed her arm, burning her skin with blackened marks that pulsed like veins. "No!" Ayman roared, forcing himself between her and the entity. His voice cracked, but something inside him surged, a mix of terror and defiance. "You want me, not them." The corridor responded, walls trembling violently, the chorus shifting into a single unified voice. The door must remain open. Ayman understood then. He could end it, by giving himself fully, by stepping into the corridor and sealing the breach with his own life. Or he could resist, condemning Sana and Hamza to be devoured with him. He turned to them, eyes brimming with tears. Sana shook her head desperately, screaming his name. Hamza's face twisted with something darker. Fear, yes, but also hatred. "Do it. End it." The figures closed in, inches away now. The air collapsed, reality bending, their voices drilling into Ayman's skull. He took a trembling step toward the fracture, heart pounding. But before he could decide, the largest figure leaned forward, its faceless head nearly touching his. And from the void where its mouth should be, it whispered with chilling intimacy, "It was never about opening the door. It was about letting us out." The house fell silent. One moment the corridor loomed, bleeding into reality, and the next it snapped shut with a deafening crack. The figures vanished, leaving behind only the stench of ash and the echo of their laughter. Ayman collapsed to the floor, chest heaving, as Sana rushed to him. Hamza stood apart, trembling, eyes wide with something between relief and rage. The attic box lay in ruins, its splintered wood smoking faintly. Whatever force it held had been released, yet somehow contained. For now. Ayman's body bore the cost. His arms and chest were marked with jagged burns, the same vein-like black scars Sana carried. They pulsed faintly, as though alive beneath the skin. For days afterward, neither spoke much. Sana tended to Ayman's wounds in silence, her eyes shadowed by sleepless nights. Hamza refused to return, distancing himself entirely, muttering about madness and never again. The bond they once shared fractured, the experience driving them apart instead of closer. But the worst part was not the silence, it was the knowing. Every mirror Ayman passed seemed to watch him. Every shadow lingered a fraction too long. He couldn't escape the truth. He hadn't closed the door. He had only delayed it. Sana, ever the scholar of folklore, searched feverishly through old texts. She concluded that what bound itself to Ayman wasn't merely a haunting, but a pact, one forged without his consent. The demons hadn't chosen the house, or even the box. They had chosen him. And in confronting them, he had sealed the bond tighter. One night, as Sana dozed in a chair, Ayman scribbled in a journal, documenting every detail. His handwriting grew jagged as he admitted what he feared most. The whispers had not stopped. They had simply changed. No longer warnings, no longer commands. Now they spoke as companions, familiar and constant. "We are with you, always." Ayman closed the journal with shaking hands. For the first time, he did not cry. He only stared at the wall, empty, resigned. He had tried to fight. He had tried to resist. But the cost of survival was clear. He was no longer alone in his own mind. The moral lay heavy in the silence that followed. Some doors, once touched, can never truly be closed. And in the faint glow of the streetlight, his shadow moved a second too late, smiling when he did not.